Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Anderson, and I am mean to people on the internet. I'm always very polite about it, though. I just tend to ask difficult questions and insist on the answers. Uh, I suppose that might be because I'm also a practicing lawyer. Now, on my channel, I talk a lot about how to use cross examination techniques in debates, and I also do debate breakdowns and analyses. I often use obviously wrong positions as models for my demonstrations, so you will see me spending a fair amount of time debunking pseudoscience, in particular young earth creationism, which is my favorite. So you can think of my channel as kind of like a self-defense class for getting into fights online. I want to welcome everyone to this debate, which I call Friendly Fire, where two outspoken opponents of young earth creationism take a run at each other on a topic of philosophy that is only tangentially related thereto. With me is my illustrious guest, a prominent science educator and debater, Snake Was Right. Now, you may think that I am not being particularly mean to my guest today, but I can assure you that this is the nicest that I have ever been to her. That, in fact, I have never said a kind word to her before this moment, all of which is to say, Snake, nice to speak with you in person for the first time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what illustrious or prestigious did you say? That's
I said illustrious, but I think prestigious
okay.
is also a fair comment. Yeah.
I'll take it. I've been MIA a little bit lately, so I've been trying to get back on the horse. Yeah, what do you want to know about me? Are you I'm familiar with some of your stuff, like Count Hovind, and I've been watching a few more of your videos lately. I like your style, tough, but not. I wouldn't say you're mean, actually. I would say you're tough. But I like your intro.
That's kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try and keep it sort of like I said, I can try and keep it kind of professional and polite and respectful. But I mean, I can be rough on people, and like I said, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I like to get into it, and um, but like I said, it's all. I mean, this is all sort of in the spirit of good fun and entertainment and education and that sort of thing. And that's the way I always kind of operate. Is that we can go in and we can do battle, but at the end of the day, we shake hands, and you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of the way it ought to be, right?
Yeah.
But
And
before you and I start trying to tear each other's heads off, I would like to get to know a little bit more about you. So, the first question I had was, why do you call yourself Snake Was Right? Is it like a biblical reference, or are you like a huge Simpsons fan?
I am a Simpsons fan. I also just love reptiles. But it is a biblical reference. So basically, I mean, I have kind of a focus on how like I would call I'm an atheist, but I call myself spiritual. So I find a lot of spiritual meaning in like fiction. And so basically the snake was right is kind of well it's an allusion to the fact that the snake was correct in challenging God in that story. And so the basically I guess kind of a tagline I use is knowledge of good and evil is a good thing. So that's basically what it means. And
Yeah.
then you can unpack it more. It's like, God said that you would die when you ate it, and I didn't, but that's basically can be summed up as knowledge of good and evil is a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think knowledge is generally a good thing, and I like the idea that like you know you can be an atheist or an agnostic or whatever, and that doesn't mean that you hate people who are religious, right? And it's like, look, I can, we can disagree about whether or not there's a God or whatever, but that doesn't mean that we don't respect each other's humanity, and we can't have like different opinions about stuff and still be honorable, forthright, honest interlocutors, right?
Mhm.
I love that you guys
Yeah,
use the word
because
interlocutors, because that's a legal term
yeah,
that I only ever hear in the terms in the context of debate, outside of
yeah,
outside of the legal profession. I think it's
yeah.
fun.
I don't know why, but I prefer it to opponent. Maybe it just sounds a little more
Yeah, it
more
does. It sounds a little bit more civil, right?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, yeah. No, in the legal world, we call any application, or like, which just means anytime you go into court between the time that like a lawsuit starts and the time that a trial occurs, is called an interlocutory application,
Mm,
right? So interlocutor just means like while you're talking, right? While the talk is going on. That's what interlocutory means. So
okay.
like, between the time that we start talking about our dispute and the time that that dispute ended, uh, everything in between is interlocutory while we're talking.
Nice.
And so an
Are you
interlocutor will be somebody you talk with. So that makes sense.
are you defense attorney or something
I
else?
do I do almost all plaintiff side work.
Okay.
I you know you, I do a little bit of defense, here and there, for like established or existing clients. Most of my work is focused on civil plaintiff side stuff. Yeah.
I was a couple weeks ago I was this close to being on the jury for a big murder case. So,
Oh,
yeah.
those are that's like I think in the U.S. they have like a lot of you guys do a lot of jury trials. You do a lot more than we do up here.
Okay. Oh, you're
Yeah.
in Canada?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In Canada, we do a lot more judge alone stuff, except for criminal stuff. They still do quite a bit of jury stuff, but for the civil side, it's almost exclusively judge alone.
Okay.
Like, in theory, you can request a jury, but you better have a very good reason why it
I think
needs to be a jury, or you're not going to get
I think those are called bench trials here, right?
one. Yep,
Okay.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Um, and why do you do this? Why do you do this online, debating and debunking and all this conflict and stuff? Like, why do you need that in your life?
I've always been argumentative. So I guess it's kind of my outlet. So I've noticed ever since I've done this, I'm not as contentious with my family and friends because I have this outlet. So I guess there's that. I've always loved debate. Like I did debate team in school. Um and arguing in comment sections is very tedious, even though I'm addicted to it. So
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
yeah,
I mean, I can certainly sympathize with, wanting to scratch that itch.
yeah.
Um, and by the way, just so for everybody who's watching, I mean, we may go after each other, hard here, or maybe not, but the goal really is just to have fun. So none of this is serious. It's just a good mental workout, and we hope you enjoy it. And neither Snake nor I are too invested in this. We're just showmen, or show people, gladiators, if you will, trying to entertain the crowd. This is not a battle to the death.
Yeah, and
And
that's another thing I really like about it is just mental workout, like you said, is like I just like breaking things down like dispassionately
mhm,
and just analyzing it. And
the analytical side, right? The intellectual
mhm,
side of it all.
yeah.
Yeah. And I find like if I'm learning new things, like learning it like for a reason, like because I'm going to be like, you know, arguing about it with somebody, like that can make
Oh
like
yeah.
something that's otherwise boring into something that's like super interesting.
That's
Cause
a
like,
huge motivator, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I know like, especially for me, like, I mean, I could be reading like some like dry, like tax law or something. Right. And I'm like, I got you, right. Like found
Mhm.
it, and you're
Yeah.
like, otherwise objectively, this would be like the dullest thing ever. Right. But it's the same thing for this stuff. It's just interesting. Yeah. So we're gonna uh I should say, like, as we go along, we may like kind of break character and just kind of do like mini postmortems partway through, just to kind of talk about technique and stuff like that, if that's okay with you. And if you want to do that at any point, like, let me know.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Enough chit chat. Let's get into a fight.
Yeah.
So this all started online, as these things do, in the comment section of a video on my channel about presuppositionalists, who, by the way, for everybody who doesn't know, are typically fundamentalist Christians who believe that it is impossible for anybody to know anything unless they believe in God, who is the source of all knowledge, logic, and reason. Now, neither of us are presuppositionalists, and we both have debated them. But where we disagree is that I said that it is important for atheists and agnostics and science affirming theists to acknowledge that we have our own presuppositions, like the reality of the world around us and the uniformity of nature and the consistency of the laws of physics and the reliability of our senses, and that those things can't really be justified, but that they don't need to be, because they're assumptions, they're axioms, they're presuppositions that we hold as true without evidence, and that everybody has to make those presuppositions in order to be able to know anything about the world around them. But Snake, you said that you don't think atheists and non-presuppositional theists need to make assumptions or presuppositions. Why
Mhm.
don't you expand on that? And you can either just rattle off what you said in your comment or express it in your own words as you like.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have it pulled up, but so I'll start with the fact that I think it's mostly fine to make those presuppositions because basically the presup Christian would have to make all those same assumptions as well. And so we have to make fewer assumptions in that case, and we're basically making the same ones. Like I don't think their argument is actually coherent, which is why I say that. Um, but yeah, I don't. So like I would,
Yeah, we're making the same presups, or like they're making the same assumptions as we do, plus one more, which is that there is a God.
yeah,
And
because
at some point during this discussion, maybe at the end, we should go through and sort of like lay that out and make that crystal clear for the audience.
yeah, I would
That
just
it
say
is
like,
in fact true that they are making those presuppositions, that they have to.
mhm,
That presuming God doesn't get you around any of them, doesn't
yeah,
help you at all.
because even that it's all based in an observation of a revelation or whatever. So they already have to trust whatever they're using to observe this revelation with.
Yeah,
Um,
well, they have to assume that God is not manipulating their senses, and
mhm.
that God is being truthful, right?
That
So
or a demon that's pretending to be God or
right, so they have to
some.
assume their senses are reliable and that God is being honest with them, right? And they
Mhm,
have to assume that, basically what they do is they just take the basic presupposition and then they just make it an element of God's character, right?
mhm,
So they say there's a God, and one of his characteristics is that he makes it so that our senses are reliable. And there is a God, and one of his characteristics is that he makes it so that the universe is consistent. And there is a God, and one of his characteristics is that he makes it so the future resembles the past. And so, like, you're making all of the same assumptions. It's not like this gets you out of a darned thing.
mhm.
Um,
And I think that this kind of gets us off, but I think that's confusing ontology and epistemology there a little bit, conflating
um,
them.
I don't know. Like, okay, so first of all, let's not just throw big words around at
Yeah.
at people, because, like, although I barely understand what those are, a lot of people straight up don't. So let's
Mhm,
just kind of break that one down, because that's something that people, when they get backed into a corner in these situations, it is useful for them to know. So ontology, by the way, for everybody, and correct me if I say this incorrectly, Snake, is ontology is the way things are, right? So, like, reality is ontology, right? So, like, that a table is real, that's an ontological statement, right? That my
mhm,
computer right now is sitting on a table, right? That's an ontological statement. Epistemology is different. Epistemology is, how do you know what you know? So I could ontologically, it could be true that my computer is sitting on a table, but maybe I don't know that my computer is sitting on a table. And how can I be sure that my computer is sitting on a table, right? Or probably better would be, how can Snake be sure that my computer is sitting on a table since he can't see it, right? So epistemologically, he has to know that. He only knows that because he heard it from me. He hasn't seen it, right?
mhm,
So it might be true. Whether or not something's true, that's your ontology. Whether or not you know that it's true is your epistemology. And so a lot of times, if you get into debates, especially with a bunch of these presuppers, what they'll say is they'll say like, well, is God real? Or, prove to me that God's not real. And you'll say like, I mean, I don't know whether he's not real in this. They'll say, well, if you don't know that, then he must be real. And it's like, no, like whether I know something or not is different from whether or not that thing is in fact the case, right?
Yeah, so they
The things that
they
I'm making.
really take advantage of doubt and the fact that we'll be honest about doubt too.
Mhm.
So it's basically just a really more sophisticated version of, well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? And just infinitely
Mhm.
just doing
Yeah.
that. So I think what they do is kind of try to smuggle in
Yeah.
an epistemological justification in the ontology,
Yeah.
whereas
Yeah. My favorite response to that is the old Austin Powers, you know. Well, how do you know that? You just told me, baby.
yeah.
Because you say you know, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, I know because you just told me, right? Unless you're telling me you actually don't know, in which case we're in the same boat. But if you
Hmm.
do know, then tell me. Stop asking me whether I know and how I know and all that thing. What's the answer then? If you're so smart, tell me. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
I think we're kind of having a meta conversation at this
Yeah, we're
point.
getting
So
off track here. So
yeah, so you were gonna. I think. Do you want to start by just sort of reading your comment and then you can expound on it?
I'd have to pull it up, but
Yeah, take your time, pull her up.
yeah, basically I'll try and kind of no, I've got it here. So um it might be easier to just say it off the top of my head, but
Do whatever you think is right. That's always my motto.
yeah, so sometimes I will just walk people through basically what I think epistemology is grounded on, like from the ground up, and kind of starts kind of from a birth type of thing. So like basically um I said you can simply use the brute facts of observation. I observe, that's inarguable. I observe patterns, that's also inarguable. They're brute facts and not presuppositions. And so um yeah, I got the comment goes on longer, but I feel like that's
That's the heart and soul of it.
yeah. So you start with just the brute facts of observation, and from there you gain self observation, and then you can observe think patterns in reality.
Right.
And I don't think that any of those are presuppositions, and that's pretty much my
Well,
position.
I mean, so here's kind of where when I read that, this is sort of where I was kind of thinking is so that you said that it's inarguable that you can observe,
Hmm.
and I'm going to start off as I'm sure you expected by hitting you with the problem of hard solipsism.
Hmm.
So I know you know what that is, but just for our audience sake, let's kind of play it out and let's just start from the very, very, very beginning.
Hmm.
Okay, so you know that you exist, right?
Hmm.
And is that beyond doubt?
Yes.
And how do you know that?
So there are observations, and basically the observer can observe itself, and when I'm saying me, I'm just referring to that phenomenon of the observer observing itself.
Yeah, like your consciousness, right? The
Hmm.
the thing that's thinking these thoughts and wondering about its existence,
Hmm.
right? So how do you know that that entity exists beyond any doubt?
Well, it's doing something,
What's it doing?
thinking, observing.
I don't know if it's observing, but certainly is thinking,
Hmm.
right?
Well, it can
But
observe itself. I would say
well, what if this is all a
thinking is a form
dream?
of
Like,
observation.
what if it's a dream and and you're just part of that dream? Like, how do you know you exist?
Well, you'd exist inside the dream, right?
I mean, would you? How do you know?
Well, something exists. If it's a dream, then it's something.
Right, but it might not be you.
So yeah, I don't understand what that means. If
I'm
it
kind of serving you a
might not be
softball
you,
here to start with,
yeah,
and that is that, like, even if it was a dream, then there's still something thinking and wondering whether it exists.
yeah,
Something must exist, whether or not it's part of a dream, whether or not the outside world is real, whether or not we all live in the matrix, right?
hmm,
There's something that's wondering about its existence. That thing, at least, must exist.
hmm,
Is that kind of where you're coming from?
yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's true. That's the old I think, therefore I am. That's
hmm,
what that means is something must exist because otherwise what's wondering about about whether it exists, right?
yeah,
But if you were in a dream, or as you know, in keeping with my name, if we were in the matrix, then like maybe you
yeah.
exist, but you can't necessarily say that anything else exists, right? Because you might be in the matrix.
Yeah, my thoughts on that are if there's only one mind and that is all that exists, then there are partitions and barriers between that mind because there are things that that mind is doing that the awareness isn't or that the consciousness isn't aware of.
Hmm. But
So
the
in what
outside world might
sense?
not be there. It might just be that you're a part of a larger mind.
Mhm.
It's just dreaming, right?
Yeah.
Or that you're
And for
part of a
me,
big computer program,
if the
and you
partition
don't know, right?
right. But if the partition is so strong that you basically don't have access to it, then I would say that there is at least some amount of separateness between the mind and whatever else is going on. So,
Hmm. Yeah, but we don't know whether that thing is real, whether it corresponds to reality, right?
correct. Yeah.
And that, in a nutshell, is called the problem of hard solipsism. That the only thing you can be 100% sure of is your own existence. In fact, it's entirely possible that we're all living in a simulation. And some people even say that it's more likely that this universe is a simulation than
Mhm.
that it's real, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't know for sure that your senses are reliable, do
Mhm.
you?
Not 100%. And I don't know if we can assign a number, but it's
No.
non-zero.
Right. I mean, it's practical, it's reliable, but you can't prove it's true, like
Mhm.
not even on an inductive basis without resorting to your senses. So the reasoning kind of becomes circular, right?
Right.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
I'd say we do have justification, but
I mean, not without not non-circular justification, because all of your justifications are based on the reliability of your senses, and you're trying to prove the reliability of your senses,
right.
right?
But there's so yeah, I don't think, outside of a couple of things like that I exist and that I observe, you're never going to have 100% certainty,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that, working
And me
within that,
too, right? I'm
but the
just saying that it
precepts
is an
aren't, which is the
assumption, right?
problem.
It's an assumption. It's practical. It makes sense to make it, but it is fundamentally it's an assumption. You can't prove it
Mhm.
without using circular reasoning. It's impossible.
Yeah, and so I kind of don't make that assumption. I work with the idea that it's possible that I don't have reliability of senses, but I am observing some sort of pattern, and sometimes the patterns, sometimes I can successfully navigate the patterns, and sometimes I can't successfully navigate the patterns.
Mhm.
So there seems to be something outside of my will that is going on, or else I would always be successful.
I mean, that may be, but that thing that's outside of your will may or may not be like an external reality, right? It may
Mhm,
just be some larger part of your consciousness.
mhm.
Right? There's
Like
really no way to,
simulation or illusion or
yeah, all that, it could be mental illness or delusion or it could
mhm,
be anything, right? It's just, I mean, this is sort of like I said, this is the hard solipsism. Nobody can get around it, and it's straight up an assumption. It's fine to make it, but I think it is an assumption, and I think that one is a lot of people are like, okay, fine, hard solipsism, but other than that, like that's just one assumption. But other than that, nothing else is an assumption, and I think that's kind of where you were coming from. Is that fair?
Mhm. And kind of the way I personally go about it is um it's not even really that I just assume that it's true for practical reasons. It's just like, well, this is all I have access to, and whether it's an illusion or whether we're in base reality, basically I'm learning the rules of whatever I'm in, whether I'm
Hmm.
in my own mind or a simulation in a lab or in some demon's dungeon or whatever.
Right. Whether this is a simulation or not, whether this is reality or not, it appears to have it appears that you can observe things and you
Mhm.
can you can build the rest of your worldview, you know, based on whatever it is that you observe, whether those things are real or not. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Mhm.
Yeah. So you don't think that there are any other presuppositions or assumptions other than that your senses are reliable, or to the extent that they're not, that it doesn't matter. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they appear to be reliable.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that like if we were to say like the problem of hard solipsism one is kind of a gimme, right? Like, if that were all I had, like I'd be like, okay, yeah, kind of technically, Mr. Anderson, sure, but like, come on, nobody solves the problem of hard solipsism. You're kind of being pedantic, right? But so
Mhm.
like let's take that one. That's a gimme. I wanted to move on and talk about your statement that and I don't know if you said this in your comment or if I got it somewhere else, but you said that logic is a necessity for existence. And you said, in fact, that logic, or in particular, the law of non contradiction, is self evident, deducible from observation, and is sufficient to justify the existence of the universe and physical reality. Did I get that right? And or is that still your view?
That doesn't sound familiar, at least. Are you paraphrasing or?
Oh, I'm definitely paraphrasing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Would you mind saying that again then? Because I
Yeah.
was
I
trying
mean,
to get the
yeah, I
exact
mean,
words.
like, this is something that I thought that you said. So, like,
Mhm.
if it's wrong, like, you're the final arbiter of what you think. So you tell me, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But what I remember you saying was something along the lines of logic is a necessity for existence, and that logic, and in particular the law of non contradiction, is self evident, deducible from observation, and sufficient to justify the existence of the universe and physical reality.
Okay. So non-contradiction is self-evident, and what was the second part?
I think it boiled down to the concept that the world or the universe must be real because something can't come from nothing. Do
Okay.
you remember that?
Not in the discussion we had, but I do think it used to really bother me, like, why is there anything at all? And I kind of came to the um thought that there must be some kind of contradiction or something like that in absolute nothingness.
Hmm.
Um because if there ever was nothingness, nothing could have ever come from it. And so there must be something just that fundamentally doesn't work about that, and stuff just exists because it can't not
Because here
exist.
we are.
Yeah. So I mean, it's still kind of an open question, but it doesn't bother me as much anymore. Um, just the idea that there's something that doesn't work about absolute nothingness.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as logic being necessary, I would say that yeah, I can agree that I think logic is the language we use to describe it, but I think everything does behave according to the law of, I guess, identity, but I think non-contradiction comes from that. So
Mhm.
things are what they are and not what they aren't.
Mhm.
And yeah.
So is it your view that something can't come from nothing because of the law of non-contradiction?
I think so.
Okay. And are you of the view that that is an absolute truth? That is, something can only ever be one thing. It can't be both that thing and its opposite at the same time?
Um, in in the simple sense, I suppose so. I know there's like other kinds of logic, but I haven't looked too deeply into it.
Hmm.
But yeah, um
So
I
if there's
think you
other kinds
can't
of
I think
logic,
I think God cannot be God and not God at the same time,
hmm,
for
can
example.
anything be like in your view, can anything be one thing and also at the same time it like not that thing at the same time? Or like, is it possible to uh like because what I
Mhm.
understood from having watched and like for the audience, like Snake's been around for like a while. Like I'm like, a baby, new kid on the block, and like I've got like I don't know, like a dozen debates, maybe, probably not even that. And Snake's been around for years and there's like lots of them. And I watched some old one, obviously, and got it mixed up in my head. I think it was your Darth Dawkins debate. That's what I got this from,
Okay.
right? You were hammering him on this thing, and
Mhm.
I kind of liked the argument, but I was like, I don't know if I agree with it.
Yeah, and
And I thought
I
it kind of
think I've
tied in
refined
with.
it since then a lot too, so
Well, that's fair. I mean, I don't think it would be fair for me to hold you to like a view that you no longer espouse, right?
Mhm.
Um,
But
that'd be
yeah,
kind of a dick move from me.
yeah, no, fair enough, but,
Uh, but
yeah,
yeah, so
I could be convinced
yeah,
maybe,
so I
but
mean, like,
I
give
don't
me the
think
modern refined version, right, of your view.
yeah, I'm not convinced. I don't know of any examples of where something can be its opposite at the same time,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
something can be A and not A at the same time.
Right. Um, so just because, like, I mean, you and I have been obviously like nerding out on philosophy stuff, but like not everybody who's watching this or will watch this is. And so like just for kind of everybody else, like, so there's when you're doing like philosophy, they say like all of the philosophy that we do, all the logic that we do typically can be boiled down to three kind of main premises, right? Which they call the laws of logic. And those are identity, which is just basically like things are what they are, right? So a pen is a pen is a pen is a pen, right? And then there's the law of excluded middle, which is that something is either one thing or not that thing, but it is not both that thing and not that thing. So, like, either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can't be both, right? A pen is either a pen or it's not a pen. It's not both a pen and not a pen. Then the law of non-contradiction is that um, is actually very similar to that, and it's just that like something is not going to be its opposite. You can't have a and not a. So excluded middle is that it can't be both a and not a, uh, and non-contradiction is that it can't be or it can't be something in between a and not a is excluded middle, and non-contradiction is they can't be both a and not a. And those are basically the laws that typically form our ability to reason. Is that
Mhm.
did I say that accurately from your perspective, Snake?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say like excluded middle, you could say it's something is either true or false and not neither. So,
Yeah, like it's 0 and 1, and not both 0 and 1, both and neither.
mhm.
Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's I think that's pretty necessary for at least our kind of thought, other than, like simpler animals that are just have observation and reaction and they're not thinking about their observations necessarily. But I think
Mhm.
animals use kind of more of an instinctual type of logic that's not necessarily self-aware, but the switches in the brain are following kind of a computer logic.
Right, and typically that's how computer logic works too, right?
Mhm.
Well, most computers that I'm aware of anyways. Um, but I remember from the debate that I watched, you were saying something stronger than that. You were saying that it is impossible to think about a world uh, to well, basically, you were saying that the law of non-contradiction made it so that you know that was the basis of your ontology, right? The basis of your being able to not just know the world around you, but that it was the basis of the existence of the world around you. Is that does that remain your view, or
I think so, yeah.
like you were saying that logic was um, prior to or like higher than God, right? Like logic comes
Mhm.
first, then God, then whatever, if there is a God.
Definitely, um, God is contingent on logic, and
Hmm.
as far as I can tell, it is the most fundamental thing, or
Hmm.
the laws.
So like that law, that one in particular, is fundamental to everything else in your view. It basically is the creation of everything.
I think that
I don't want to
non-contradiction
push you
comes
into
from the law of
taking a
identity.
position that you don't have, right? Like, so if I'm saying something, you're like, I
Mhm.
mean, I might have said that a long time ago, and maybe I thought that a long time ago, but I don't think that today, and so you're being a dick. Then I would like to
Yeah.
not be a dick.
No, and I try not to be like Darth Dawkins and just kind of have canned responses, so
No, yeah,
I'm pulling what I think out in real time. So I think that the law of non-contradiction comes from the law of identity.
sure.
I and I kind of view them as basically the same thing, or just different expressions of the same thing almost.
Hmm.
But as far as I can tell, yeah, that seems to be the most fundamental thing that we can observe or talk about or think about, and seems to be sufficient to describe the ontology of my worldview.
Right. And so, like, tying it back to what we were talking about when in terms of like presumptions, like in your view, like these laws of logic, they're like they're true and they're something that you can derive from observation. They're not assumptions that we make. Is that fair?
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and that's because you don't ever see, you know, contradictions of those laws in nature. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think it violates the function of thought as well. Like I
Like
don't think
it's
thought is
not possible to
possible.
think logically without them.
I don't think it's possible to think in terms of I don't think you can think of something that it both is and is not what it is. I think you can construct it in a sentence,
Hmm.
which is the funny thing about language. It's like, this sentence is false. I think, you can kind
Yeah,
of construct nonsense from language, but
yeah.
you can't actually conceive of it.
Hmm. Except that we can, and we have seen things like this in nature.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of quantum computing?
Yes.
So, it's fundamentally different from regular computing because it can encode its qubits in any one of three states, right?
Hmm.
0, 1, and a superposition of both 0 and 1 at the same time, and kind of both, and kind of neither,
Hmm.
right? You've heard of that before?
Yeah.
And so that would be, I mean, the law of identity, something is what it is. Well, is it a quarks or, is it a qubit that's got a spin of clockwise or a spin of counterclockwise. It's both.
You seem to be frozen, so I don't want to give my response right now. Okay.
Nope.
It sounds like you're there, but you're frozen to me, like visually.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, okay, it's back now.
How about now?
All
You see me
good.
doing this?
You're fuzzy, but you're moving. Kind of like subatomic particles. But yeah, so I could be wrong. I'm not a physicist, but as far as I understand it, the quantum superposition is more of an uncertainty than just
No.
what it is.
No.
Okay.
No, it's weirder than that. It's weirder than that. It's like an actual thing, right? So like have you ever heard of the double slit experiment?
Mm-hmm.
This is another example of, quantum superposition. You've heard of the particle wave duality of light?
Yes.
Okay. So imagine if you were to take let's use electrons. You were to take a single electron and you were to fire it at a barrier, and that barrier's got two slits in it. And you can either hit the barrier and bounce off, or it can go through one of the slits, or it can go through another one, or the other one of the slits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to hit like a detector on the other side of that barrier. And so what you would see if you just like fired a bunch of electrons one by one at the barrier is that you would see two lines on the other side, right? That are in line with each of the slits as the electrons passed through either one slit or the other, right? But if you were to like put those two slits in a tub of water and then like make waves, the waves would go through both slits and they would form an interference pattern where there would be like a whole bunch of like, places where the waves added up to create peaks and low parts where they created troughs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I periodically have to go back and
I'll
refamiliarize myself with that experiment because
I'll show you.
it's confusing stuff.
I'll show you what it looks like. Here we go. Okay, so you see this thing where there's like kind of a bunch of lines, or where like, or maybe one of these other ones like this one where there's kind of see there'd be kind of high spots and low spots. Or here, this is even better. See this electrons that go through this grate. If it were a wave, it would create this interference pattern. But and if you shoot like a beam of electrons, then it will create this interference pattern. But if you shoot them through one by one, it does something really weird where sometimes it will look like this if you're watching as they do it, but sometimes it will still look like this even though you shoot them one by one. And the only way that it can be doing that is if the particle is actually passing through both slits and interacting with itself and creating an interference pattern. Because when you shoot them through one by one, they either go through one slit or the other. But if you look at them over time, it'll actually create this multi-banded pattern. And that's because it really is in this sort of intermediate sort of phase where the probability of whether it passed through one or the other hasn't collapsed yet. And until you check, it won't have collapsed. It's a really weird thing, but that's the double slit experiment. But the same thing is kind of true when it comes to quantum states in quantum computers, right? And we use that. We use that property of quantum computers to do quantum computing, and so we can actually code and deliberately make it so that qubits are in that intermediate state, where basically we're violating one of what you call the fundamental laws of logic, right? And we can and do logic and write programs for quantum computers, right?
Mhm.
You know that's true, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm loosely familiar with quantum computing.
Yeah. Well, all I want from you is that you know that we write programs for quantum computers.
Yeah, I don't really know how they work, but
Yeah, but what you can deduce from that is that we must be using logic that does not rely on the law of either excluded middle or non-contradiction, however you want to think of it, right?
so does it violate non-contradiction or just excluded middle? Because it
I think it's
seems
kind of
like
like
it's just
how you look at it, right? They're both spinning. They're both 0 and 1 at the same time. So that's kind of more excluded middle, but it's also kind of a contradiction because they're spinning this way and that way. I mean, I think it kind of depends on how you look at it, but either way, it's violating one of them. It's violating one of what, you would think of as one of the iron laws of logic.
So
Right?
is it the case that we're describing it in a way that violates those laws, but it really, the collapsed function, it just doesn't exist at all yet
So the way that it
until it
works is that
collapses?
it's really messed up, right? So like let's go back to the double slit experiment, right?
Mhm.
If you watch the electrons go through the slits, they will make two lines. If you don't, you just fire a whole bunch of them, even if you fire them one by one, they will make an interference pattern. And they've even done like really weird experiments where they actually like entangled particles so that there was a twin that was its opposite, and then that went into like a computer, and they like didn't look at the electrons as they were going through the slits because that would, like, just observing them changes them, right? So they look at their partners that can't possibly have been affected, and they only look like after they check the interference pattern. And it's like somehow the electrons would know whether or not you were going to check their partners before you did. And if this was going to be one of the ones that you checked, then they would form two lines. And if it was one of the ones that you didn't check, it would form an interference pattern. It's almost like the electrons like traveled back in time and deleted the information so that you wouldn't know.
Okay.
It's screwed
So
up.
is it
mind bender, right? They really are in this quantum superposition.
is it observing with the naked eye, or are you talking about just
You
measuring
can't
it?
observe electrons with the naked eye, right? You have to.
Yeah.
So when you observe when you observe like a subatomic particle like this, it alters it. It causes its waveform to collapse, right? And so what they do is they entangle the particles so that they are they are opposites of each other. Um, and this is where they talk about like that spooky action at a distance, where it's like it seems like they're sending information without regards to how far apart they are, but they're actually not. But it's weirder than that, right? And I'm not going to get into the physics of it because I mean, I don't truly understand the details, and I'm probably not even doing a super good job of explaining it. But what I can tell you is that this breaks the law of non-contradiction, or excluded middle, depending on how you look at it, to some degree. And it doesn't mean that we can't do logic. It's just it's a different kind of logic. It's a different system of logic,
Mhm.
right?
So when you say when you watch the particles, it's just measuring them,
You're
basically?
measuring their spin,
Mhm.
or in this case, or in the case of the double slit experiment, you're measuring which slit they went through, right?
And that's
So, like,
through the
what would
pattern
happen
that
is
they
that
make
you
on
would
the.
create an entangled pair, right?
Mhm.
And then if that electron was going to go through and be fired at slit one, then then its partner would go and be recorded over here. And if it was going to be fired, I think that's right. If it was going to be fired at slit two, it would be recorded over there. And so you could check the partner to see which slit each individual electron went through, or you could look at the pattern. And you can do either one, but if you try and do both, it will collapse the waveform.
Wait, so how do you know if it doesn't collapse it if you don't measure
Because you
it?
can look at the interference pattern. As long as you don't know which slit each electron went through, it will produce an interference pattern. If you do know which slit each electron went through, it will not produce an interference pattern.
So it's
So as long as you don't know which slit each electron went through, each electron goes through both.
so the scientist knowing which slit it went through affects it,
Right.
or which one you're measuring?
It's almost like the scientist knowing which slit it went through affects it. But we're really getting far afield.
Yeah, I've tried to look into this stuff.
You know what? There's a really great.
Uh,
I'm going by memory because it's been some time since I looked at this myself. But if you go and you look at PBS Spacetime, they have a great couple of videos explaining. It's like a series of like 3 1-hour videos. So you're in for a treat if this stuff interests you. But
okay.
it is mind bending.
Yeah, because I
Yeah. It's like
basically
the
used to
probability
be.
of going through each slit is a wave, and that wave interacts with itself, and that's why it produces an interference pattern.
Yeah.
And when you collapse that probability wave into one or the other, then it just goes through one or the other.
I used to kind of almost call bullshit on quantum physics because I would read these articles that were like talking about the observer effect and things like that, and I was like, that can't be real. So and a lot of it is the popular articles dumbing it down for people and
Mhm.
getting things inaccurately. So, but the impression I have is not that an actual conscious observer affects it, but just the act of measuring it in any
Yeah,
way
yeah,
changes
it's
the
the act of
result.
measuring it. But
Right.
the thing is that when you do the measuring, even if you do the measuring not on the thing that was that like even if you do the measuring not on the particle that went through the slit, but on its partner, it still collapses the waveform.
Okay. And my the other thought that occurred to me is you mentioned that it kind of appears to be going back in time, and
Yeah, that part I'm a little bit fuzzy on. Hang on a second. I'm gonna give my wife some space here.
she enjoying the physics conversation.
Yeah, this was supposed to be a philosophy debate. Now you got me talking
Yeah.
about physics.
Yeah, well, it's all kind of blends together at some point.
Well, sometimes.
But yeah,
Yeah.
oh, time travel.
The quantum. Hang on a second. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
here's kind
time.
of the I guess the point that I wanted to make in terms of the quantum computing thing is that um, regardless of like how incredulous this sounds, the point of quantum computing is that you can have zeros, ones, and superpositions of 0 and 1. You agree with that?
Yeah,
Right?
I
And
think
that's
so.
how we can do faster solving of certain problems in quantum computing, right?
Mhm.
And what that means is that it is possible to do logic without, strictly speaking, having um, the law of non-contradiction. Is that fair?
I'm still not getting the non-contradiction part.
Well, I
Because
mean, either
is
it's
it
0
actually
or it's 1. It
contradicting
can't be
itself?
both. That's non-contradiction, isn't it?
Is it both though, or is it neither in the
Well,
superposition?
it's both,
Okay. Um,
right?
I'm
And
not
if
really
it's
sure what that
neither,
is.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong and it's neither, but if it's neither, then it's the law of excluded middle
Mhm.
is violated, right? So pick one.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter which.
The thought I had about what you said about it appearing to go back in time is that at the subatomic level there might be some sort of fourth dimensional travel and we just don't
No,
understand
no,
it.
it's that's you're gonna have to I that's an aside. You're gonna have to go
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
and watch
I don't
those
know.
PBS videos
But
to I can't explain it.
okay.
I don't have the I don't have the background to explain it.
Yeah.
I mean, my point is simply quantum computing is a thing. You have superpositions. Superpositions are a thing. Superpositions mean that the law of non-contradiction or the law of excluded middle, one of the two, can be violated and we can still do logic. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
So,
and what about Schrodinger's cat?
okay,
Is
what about
that I don't think I could be convinced that a whole cat could be in a state of quantum
it
superposition. I
can't.
think that's
It
just an
can't.
analogy,
No, it
right?
can't. It
Okay.
can't. It's a thought experiment to
Mhm.
try and illustrate the idea. It's like this isn't true for a whole cat.
Mhm.
Um, and but it's kind of it was a thought experiment to kind of illustrate the weirdness of superpositions, right?
Okay.
Where it's like because the cat, like when you interact with other elements of like reality, like a cat counts as an observer, right? It's the waveform is collapsed at that point, right? And so when it's effect when the quantum particles effect is kind of felt in the outside world, whether that outside element is conscious, sentient, whatever, doesn't matter. Like the waveform collapses, right? So, so Schrodinger's cat itself would never be alive or dead. But if Schrodinger's cat were a subatomic particle, then you can think of it kind of like the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. It's to sort of illustrate the idea of a quantum superposition.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't find it helpful
What's that?
personally. I don't find the analogy helpful personally.
Well, Schrodinger
Um,
actually came up with it to show how unhelpful and weird the idea was.
okay.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
wasn't trying to explain it to people. He was trying to show how confusing it was.
that makes sense.
So, in a sense, I guess it did its job.
Mhm.
Yeah. But when it comes to these like laws of logic, what I would suggest to you, and you can tell me what you think, but I would suggest that these laws of logic aren't really laws at all. They are themselves presumptions. They're guesses that we have about the world. And they aren't necessary and they aren't even necessarily true. In fact, they might even be not true, but they're useful and they're consistent most of the time, and that's why we make them. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think if I had to adjust my conception of it, that they're maybe not the most fundamental thing, um, but I would say more fundamental than a god.
I mean, I'm not
Still,
going to argue with you on that one.
yeah.
I think that there's a good case to be made that that God, like there's an old Platonic argument that, like, the idea of whether or not something is good is or maybe independent of whether or not the God chooses it, right? That
Mhm,
does God choose good, or does something become good because God chooses it? And his argument was, no, God chooses things that are independently good, and it's not, and
mhm.
so there are forces out there that are more fundamental, if you want to use that, if you want to use the Darth Dawkins terminology, more
Yeah,
fundamental than God.
more ultimate.
And I think there's validity to that argument. But my point, my thesis here, my position in this debate, to the extent that this has actually really kind of become more of a friendly discussion than a debate, but I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing that I'm trying to convince you of is that the laws of logic are their assumptions. They're guesses about the way the world works, and they are usually true and they are useful, and so we make them. And when we have to, we unmake them. Like, even the idea that something can't come from nothing, like, that's not strictly speaking necessarily true either, right? Because we have things like, when you look at empty space, we know that even truly empty space isn't actually fully empty, because there's constantly these, they call them virtual particles, that pop in and out of existence and then occasionally annihilate each other. And that's why, like, even intergalactic interstellar space isn't absolute zero, because there's this 0 point energy that's constantly being generated, right?
Mhm.
So there's like energy that's coming from, as far as we can tell, nothing. And then there's also like the expansion of the universe itself, which is accelerating, and it's accelerating so much that, like, galaxies on the opposite ends of the observable universe are moving away from each other at faster than the speed of light, which is possible as long as it's the space that's moving. It's not things that are moving through space,
Right,
right?
yeah.
But, like, where is the energy from the expanding and accelerating expansion of that space coming from? Like, as far as we can tell, it's coming from nothing, from the empty space itself,
Mhm.
right? So, like, that, what they call dark energy, I mean, is that something coming from nothing? If so, like, seemingly that also does break the law of non-contradiction, right? But
The way that I thi think about it, or have come to understand it, is more that nothing isn't really nothing, that it has contained within it two somethings that kind of annihilate each other, but it can also be unpacked, sort of like,
I mean, maybe we honestly don't know,
yeah.
right?
Well, yeah,
Um,
and there's a
but
lot of
I,
doubt.
I
We
guess
don't
what I'm
know how it
saying is that,
works.
like, fundamentally, to say that, like, that non-contradiction is a hard thing, or that even logic itself is observable and derivable from observations. I mean, like, we certainly, like, typically, I would say it is true that you know matter and energy interact in a certain set of ways, and
Mhm,
that those ways, we usually conceptualize them in accordance with logic, and you can derive the laws of logic from observing matter and energy and the ways that they interact, but that system of logic is an abstraction. They're assumptions that we make, they're not they're not even necessarily true of reality, and B, they're not the only way of doing it. It's just like, in math, you have, your, in geometry, right? Um, if you draw a triangle on a flat piece of paper, then its internal angles will add up to 180 degrees every time, right? Definitionally.
Mhm.
And that's always true every time. And we thought that that was like a fundamental truth until we realized that if you do that on a curved surface, like a saddle shaped surface, or a globe, like a ball, that the the angles don't add up to 180 degrees. On a ball, they add up to more than that. On a saddle, they add up to less than that.
Mhm.
And you know, these rules that we thought were rules were actually just assumptions based on like arbitrary, you know, parameters that we established. And I'd suggest to you that like the laws of logic themselves are the same. You can do without them, and we do sometimes. And the laws of nature usually follow them, but sometimes not.
Um, yeah,
Thoughts?
I wouldn't call them assumptions because they could be observed. I think
They can,
you
and
can.
I mean, but they're not always observed, right? They're not universally true.
Mhm.
So we could say that, most swans are white, and so we can say generally speaking, swans are white, right? But it's not like, assuming we assume swans are white, and usually that assumption is correct, but they aren't necessarily white.
Yeah, I
It's
think the
useful to assume that
assumption
swans are white.
the
They can be black,
assumption
possibly.
here, yeah. I think the assumption here would be that the observation matches reality. And kind of what I'm getting at is not that we necessarily um, can prove beyond a doubt that our observations are reality, but that is a justification for believing that it has a non-zero chance of representing reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is, I think that too is an assumption, right?
Okay.
Because so right now, basically, what you're talking about is so. So before we get to that, I guess before we leave this, would you agree with me that to some degree the laws of logic themselves aren't necessarily true, and that we typically assume they're true, but we can do without that, and nature sometimes does?
I'd have to go back and double check, but I think you made a good case on at least the law of excluded middle. Um, and I'd actually lean towards yes, but I think that there is this quality to, the quantum research that is, it's like we just don't
We
understand
need
it.
to
And
look into
maybe,
that a little more before you know,
yeah, maybe we don't understand it
you're
enough.
really messing with my cross examination style because you're being very reasonable.
I try.
What's that?
I try
No, I
to,
think
to
that's
mess
I
with
think
you
that's a
and be
fair point.
reasonable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it is fair to say like I'm a little bit muddled on the way the quantum world works too, because it's complicated. It's confusing as hell.
Yeah.
Um,
And it
but yeah,
may be that there is.
that's my pitch, is that logic is useful, and
Mhm.
but it's not, when people are like, where did logic come from? I mean, I would argue that we made it up. you know to some degree, I think you can make the argument that, like, you know there are causal relationships and logical relationships that matter follows, and that are inherent in and built into matter, and that we observe, and which are typically true, and that those laws of logic are derived from observations to that extent. that we're just
Mhm.
observing like inherent logic that is built into the behavior of the interactions between forms of energy, most fundamentally, right? Like ultimately everything is, like if we were going to say what's the fundamental of everything, it's energy, right? Because matter is just a form of energy, right? Energy is like, and everything started, as far as we know, as energy. And there are seemingly certain, you know, behaviors that energy exhibits and relationships that energy has, which are consistent over time and space, which form, which follows a particular set of rules. And if you were to say that those rules are, we observe those rules and basically those form the basis of our logic, I think that's defensible to some degree.
Mhm.
Whether that necessarily means the law of non-contradiction or identity or excluded middle, I mean, I don't know, but some form of some kind of logic, I think you could say is just inherent in the nature of reality or the nature of energy. I guess I would probably say.
Yeah, and it's a little different because when you ask me like
I don't know why I'm
my
like undermining my good admission that I got from you, but here I am.
I I got to you. But yeah. No, so I think there's a little bit of my ontology is more of a stab in the dark. I would
Yeah,
say
I think we're
like
both kind of
whereas
groping towards the truth, and that's part of the thing, right?
yeah, but as far as epistemologically, like I would say logic is just observed to be useful. So I would agree with you more there epistemologically. But as far as how I conceive of the world, what I think the nature of it is, I would say it's based in some sort of logic.
Yeah. Um. Okay, now let's talk about. You were saying like look, uh, it's justifiable because I can observe that that has worked over and over and over again, right?
Mhm.
And and I was saying, well, there's an assumption built in there too, that is unjustifiable, and that is the uniformity of nature, right? So let me kind of walk you through this. And you may have heard this before, but do you think the sun is going to come up tomorrow?
I do.
Why?
Because I have a concept of that the sun is there, it's a burning ball of helium, and we're orbiting around it. And as far as I'm aware, the matter it's made out of doesn't behave in a way that would make that would make the Earth stop spinning or the sun. Did I say helium or hydrogen?
It's both, so you're good.
Yeah. So the matter of the sun would just disappear. I have no reason to think that.
Right, but the assumption that you're making is that the present or the future in this case is going to resemble the
Mhm,
past, right?
mhm.
So you're assuming that the way that things have always worked before is the way that they're going to work tomorrow, right?
Um,
Like you're assuming the laws of physics will be the same tomorrow as they are today, right?
I don't know if I'm assuming that. I just don't have a reason to think that they would change.
Right, but you don't have a reason to think that they will stay the same, do you?
Well, I observe
Or I
that
guess
they
you
always
do,
have
but what is the basis of your reason for thinking that the laws of physics will be the same tomorrow as they were yesterday?
because I observed that they haven't
Because they were
changed.
like that the day before, right?
Yeah, and I don't
And the
have a
day
reason to
before that.
think that they would.
But you don't have a reason for that. But that doesn't mean like that would only be a basis for the assumption in the event that you made that assumption, right? The idea that the laws of physics have always been consistent in the past is only evidence for the fact that they will be consistent in the future if you assume that the future will resemble the past.
Well, if I assume that whatever exists behaves in a random
consistently,
manner.
then you can look at your observations and say consistently it's done this, so it will continue to be consistent. But you're making an assumption about consistency, and you're trying to use consistency to justify your assumption about consistency.
Um, I'm not sure about that. I think that if things are happening randomly for no reason,
I'm not saying they are
that
happening randomly for no reason. I'm saying that they might tomorrow. It's stupid to think that, right? It's
yeah, I
not
have no reason to
practical.
think that.
It's not practical, right? To break this assumption would be a dumb idea, but that doesn't change the fact that it is an assumption, right? It
So what
has
do you mean
always
by
worked in the
assumption
past.
then?
I'm saying that you're assuming that the future will resemble the past. Things are going to work the same tomorrow as they did yesterday. The sun will come up tomorrow because it's always come up every morning since ever, right? But that's only true. That only follows. That's only logical. You can only use inductive reasoning to get there if you presume first that the future will resemble the past. You can't presume that without referring to that presumption. It's a circle, right? It's an
I think
inescapable circle.
the basis of the way I think about it is cause and effect. Whereas if there's a change, there must be some kind of cause to that change.
Right?
So what reason
But
do I
that's
have
only
to think that
still
it will
true.
change?
Like cause and effect only holds if you assume that, like, if you assume that causes and effects are consistent. Otherwise, you can't assume that any particular cause is going to have any particular effect, because the only evidence that you have that it will have that effect is your experience. And we're talking about the validity of your experience itself, right? You're assuming that the validity of your experience is going to hold,
So
because it's a fundamental assumption. That's the
I
problem
guess
when we're talking about these fundamental assumptions, that they're the basement, they're the foundation of everything. Like, you can't, there is nothing below this that you can use to ground it. It is the ground, it's the bottom.
so like I think it helps a lot to compare things with a simulation. So like if tomorrow the whoever's running the simulation decides no sun anymore and it
Mhm,
just happens.
mhm.
Um I don't think I'm unjustified in saying that so far what we observe is that the solar system works in a certain way. And we don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
justification to
that's
say
right,
that
but you don't
someone
have a
will
justification for
unplug
this.
the simulation.
What's that?
And we don't have justification to think that someone will change the simulation. But it could still be
That's
true.
true, but we also don't have justification for thinking that somebody's not gonna change the simulation. I mean, other than a
And yeah.
practical justification, right? The
Mhm,
justification is a practical one, because if you don't make this assumption, if you insist on saying, "Well, you never know, God, like, God could do a miracle tomorrow and just say, the laws of physics are different today, right? Because I
mhm,
feel like it, right?" Then basically what that means is that you can't know anything, right? Because you
mhm.
can't, like, nothing that you know now matters, right? And nothing that you understand can be applicable. Logic doesn't matter because the rules could change tomorrow. So if somebody takes the position that, you know, that the uniformity of nature doesn't apply, and you can't presume the laws of physics, and that we can't be sure that the future is going to resemble the past and the present resembles both of them, then basically what they're saying is there's no point in having a conversation with them, because they are literally admittedly ignorant of the entirety of the world around them,
Mhm.
right? It just leads, it's a very short road to solipsism there, right? Because you can't know anything. Nothing's
Yeah.
consistent. So nothing you know matters. So what do I care what you think?
Yeah, and the reason I like to compare it to the simulation is like because we could be in a simulation and we don't know that we're
Sure.
not. And
Mhm.
so I just would quibble on calling it an assumption, or at least a baseless assumption, because according to the information we have, the sun should come up tomorrow.
That part is, well, again, based on the information we have, still relies on the assumption that that information has any value whatsoever in predicting the future.
I would say it has a non-zero value in predicting the future.
It only has a non-zero value in predicting the future if you assume the future will resemble the past, right? It only matters if you assume it matters.
Um, well, I could predict it and then it could happen, and then that would
Sure, but
show.
then that prediction might not have any value for the next prediction because the rules could change again, right? Now they probably won't,
Well,
right? It's a useful assumption to make because it's consistently been true. But the
yeah.
fact that it's consistently been true only matters once again. It's a circle. It's just
Well, here's
this is Hume is the like this isn't my idea, right? This is a very old idea. It's called the problem with induction. David Hume
mm,
is the one who came up with it, and it's like, you know, people have tried to solve this one for. I think he's like I don't know, 17th or 18th or 16th. He's an old, like long dead person, right? And like, yeah, like it's, you do have to make the assumption that the laws of nature are consistent, and that the future, that God's not going to change the rules tomorrow, and that the future will resemble the past, or else you don't know anything, right? You can't know anything. So, that, like, that's the real solution as far as I know, is that it's an assumption we have to make, and it's a reasonable assumption to make, and it's a practical assumption to make, but it is an assumption. And I guess, like, the thing that I wanted to get across to everybody is that, like, you know, as much as scientists want to be able to say that they're not making assumptions, they are. And if you want to not get caught out by presups, like going off on you on this stuff, like, you have to realize there is a basement in the philosophy. Like, philosophy of science is a thing, and we rely on it without even realizing it because these assumptions are so common sense. But when people without common sense question them, yeah, they're assumptions.
yeah. So where I would disagree is that the idea that the prediction holds no value at all for the
It holds
future.
value under reasonable assumptions.
I think yeah.
But take away the assumption that the future will resemble the past, your prediction has no value.
But I don't think it's a baseless assumption because it has come true over and over again.
Right? But
Um,
that's
so
still
it's
when did it do that?
so I don't
In the
in the
future or
past.
the past? In the
Yeah.
past. And we are not
So
assuming that the future will resemble that past. So everything that happened in the past that you're using to base it on, you can't get there from
yeah,
here.
and I agree. I'm just saying that I don't think it's an all or nothing in terms of value. I think that there is some value even if it fails.
Without that assumption. Like, let's say we lived in a world where gods were real and
Mhm.
magic was real, right? And like, we lived in a Dungeons and Dragons world where it would be, you know, young Earth creationists would basically, like, atheists would be like young Earth creationists, denying reality in the face of overwhelming evidence because, like, the gods walk among us and we have clerics that can do, that can raise people from the dead and stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
In that world, then, like, saying that you could predict the future, it would be like, maybe, right? You wouldn't be able to say definitively that when Joe dies that he's dead, right? Because a cleric could come by tomorrow and raise him. You know,
Mhm.
it. If everything could change on the whim of a god, and the gods are real and walking around us and regularly change things, then nothing is reliable, right? You can't predict things because the prediction is that things will be unpredictable.
Well, can something be reliable even if it's not 100% reliable?
Of course it can, right? So you mean
Right.
you could go and go like stochastically, like,
Mhm.
we do that all the time with, there's lots of things in the real world that, we can't predict with 100% accuracy, and so there are probabilities and stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
But, then we rely on those probabilities, and those probabilities are bounded, right? And the future is going to resemble the past probabilistically in terms of, it will be here or here, but it's not going to be in, Georgia, right? And we don't know whether from here or here, but we know the probabilities, right? If
Mhm.
there was, like I said, if there were gods in the world and it could, and my coffee cup could be in Georgia tomorrow, then I don't know where I put my coffee cup because it is in a different place around the world at any given moment. And I have no control over knowing where it is because there's no rhyme or reason and there's no consistent pattern. And if there's no consistent pattern, then you can't know anything about that thing.
Mhm. Um, but I would say that we do observe pretty consistent patterns.
Sure, we do. And that's why it's reasonable to make the assumption. It's just that it is an assumption.
Okay, so it's not an unjustified assumption, right?
It's an unjustified assumption, but it's not an
But it's
unreasonable
a
assumption.
wait, so it's reasonable but unjustified? I'm not sure I understand that.
Justified means that there is like because it is circular reasoning, right?
Okay.
But we do it because it's practical and there's really no other way. And so it's not like you can't justify it with logic, but it's the only thing we got and it makes sense for us to do it because practically that's the way you got to go, right? So it's maybe I bet would it be better to say it's practical to make this unjustified assumption
Um,
because reasonable has kind of like this, I don't know, um, like it sort of feels like I'm saying that it's based on reason and then like justification, reason, that kind of. What I'm really saying is it's practical to make this unjustified assumption.
well, I just don't I feel like you're using justified in like an absolute sense.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Cuz the
cannot be
way
justified without assuming it to be true, without assuming that very thing to be true. And that's just because we have no, like, you can't reason without axioms, right? You have to have that like raw material to to reason. That's one of the things precepts like will try and take away from you like all the time is like they won't give you any premises. They'll like prove your conclusion with no premises. And it's like I can't
yeah.
reason without premises. And
Yeah.
this is like one of our base premises that we use all the time. If you take it away, like reason falls apart.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, like
building bricks without, not just without straw, without mud, without anything.
yeah, they can't even talk about their argument without those
Yeah.
assumptions.
Yeah. No, they want you to like, I hear these guys and they're like, we want you to prove logically that God does not exist, but you can't use logic.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you got me then. I can't logically prove something without using logic. You're right.
And therefore they're right by default.
Yeah. Well, no, right? But
Yeah,
yeah.
well that's their viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like it's yeah, they people like to do that all the time. I mean, um when I was debating Hovind about kinds, right? I
Mhm.
asked him like, you know, when you say kind, like, is it possible if something changed enough that it would be a new kind? And he said, yeah, like if something changed enough, it would be a new kind. And so I was like, okay, cool, that's cool. So, I just defined something that changed a lot, and then that will be a new kind. And he said, yeah. And then I was like, well, okay, here's a dog that turned into a single-celled um, parasite that lives as a venereal disease in other dogs. That's pretty different. And then he went, "Oh, that doesn't count." And I was like, "Well, you said that it would."
Yeah.
But then afterwards, people were like, "Well, Hovind never should have agreed, with you that, that something, no matter how much it changes, it's still a dog, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, well, then, I mean, then it would have been a pretty short conversation, because then I would have been like, okay, well, then you win, right? Because then, by definition, nothing can change kind. So, like, show me a dog that turns into something other than its kind. Well, you're telling me that if it started as a dog, it can never turn into another kind. So you're asking me to do something impossible. So you're asking me to show you a married bachelor. Good job. Like, you just defined yourself into a win, I guess. Like,
Mhm.
it's pretty meaningless for you, I think.
Yeah, well, and in reality, that's kind of how biology works, is the law of monophyly.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, if you watch my first debate, like, I kind of grill him on the law of monophyly, and I'm like,
Mhm.
you understand that, like, something, you know, if it's a dog is still a tetrapod, is still a vertebrate, is still a chordate, is still a eukaryote. Like,
Yeah.
it didn't stop being any one of those things when it became the new thing, and that's monophyly.
It's still a
And
dog, but it's different
yeah, it's
kind
still
of
a
dog.
dog, and and it's still a wolf, and it's still a canine, and it's still it's still all of those things,
Mhm.
even though it becomes the new thing. And that doesn't mean that it hasn't changed kinds. And went in and got that, and from that admission from him before we moved on, right?
Mhm.
Because people like to pull that kind of crap. But yeah, I think that's we've I think we beat this nicely to death, and I don't think we're really far apart here in terms of what we think.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I just to
it's been
go back
a
to
pretty
kind of what
pleasant conversation.
we were just talking was like I think you can have some justification, but not 100% justification.
What do you mean? You mean in terms of fundamental assumptions? I mean, in general, I think that's
Just
absolutely true, right?
yeah, just for
Like,
beliefs.
I just don't think, with respect to
Like
fundamental assumptions, you can have any justification at all. Like, you
like in a
cannot prove that your senses are real. You cannot prove that that logic is um, that logic is unassailable, right? You cannot
mm,
you can't establish the origin of logic. You can't prove your senses are real. You can't prove the future is, you can't partially justify the future is going to resemble the past without circularity. You can't prove your senses are reliable without circularity. Not partially, not in no way.
yeah, and I agree. I just don't think you really need to in
I agree
order
with
to
you there.
beat the precept, basically.
Well, yeah, like, I mean, the thing is, like I said, in terms of, like, well, the precept says, oh, well, I can assume that my senses are true because I have a divine revelation from God,
Hmm.
right? And it's like, right, but how do you know that God is telling you the truth? You're assuming that.
Hmm.
So you're assuming then, in the end, anyways, that you've gotten a divine revelation from God, that that divine revelation is reliable, and that that divine revelation allows you to trust your senses. And really, what you're saying is that, because you can't prove that that was in fact a divine revelation from God without referring to the divine revelation from God. So the idea that you got a divine revelation from God about this specific thing is also, like, a presupposition, is also an unjustified assumption.
Hmm.
And you also have to presume that there was a God to give it to you. So A, there's a God that gave, or there's a God to give you divine revelations. B, that God did give you a divine revelation. C, that divine revelation had the content of my presupposition, which is that the senses are reliable. So I have one presupposition and you have three, and yours is somehow superior. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
I do like that approach. And the approach I've been trying lately, or I guess with a lot of my conversations with precepts, is just kind of like I have my justifications are imperfect, and I know that, and I admit that, but I have some justification, whereas just the assumption that the revelation is from God, that has zero justification whatsoever.
I mean,
So,
what's your justification that like, we can go around this again. What's your justification that
mm,
your senses are reliable?
just the regularity with which we observe it to be,
But you can be
which is
regularly lied to. You could be
yeah,
regularly in the matrix,
of course.
right?
But
So,
there is
all of your
some
senses, like
observation.
all of your observations that you're using to justify the reliability of your observations rely on the reliability of your observations,
Mhm.
right?
But
So
the
there is
fact
no justification that is not circular.
yeah, but the fact is that I do observe it. I do observe the patterns. So there's
Sure,
that we have that information. It's
but just
imperfect.
the sheer fact that your senses, or that what you believe to be your senses, are consistent doesn't mean that they're reliable. Consistency and reliability are not the same
Mm,
thing, and consistency does not justify reliability,
mm.
right? You can have a
Yeah,
gun
and
sight that is consistently off.
yeah, and that's imperfect, but there's nothing behind the assumption of God. There's no observation, there's just no consistency. There's no content at all. And I kind of try and compare that
There's no content behind the existence of God. I mean,
behind
there's like
the assumption,
there's
the
evidence for the
assertion.
existence of God. We can say that it's not sufficient, or that we don't think it's
Yeah.
adequate, and that there's like, you can even, I'm not an atheist. I'm more of a dirty fence sitting
Yeah.
agnostic, right? But um
No, that's not quite what I meant. I'm just referring to when the when you have the precept saying that their presupposition is God and it's based on the revelation from God, there is no um reliability behind that at all. There's no justification. It's pretty much just assumed. And they never really they never describe the revelation, or what they do is they assume the reliability of their senses to prove that God has revealed to them that there is reliability of the senses.
mhm. I mean, like, everybody is this circular. There is
Mhm.
no there is no high ground here, because we're talking about the basement. Everybody has a basement. It's the same basement, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has to make these same presumptions, these same presuppositions, if you will,
Mhm.
right? Whether you believe in a God or you believe there is no God.
And I would definitely agree in terms of having a conversation. You have to have these assumptions.
Yeah, you have to. Otherwise, like I said, otherwise there's no
That's
point in
like
talking to that person, because that person is ignorant by
yeah.
their own admission. They literally know nothing.
Mm,
They don't think they know anything. So, why should I care about what you think if you don't think you know anything?
yeah.
Right?
It's are you familiar with the three body problem
Sure.
series?
I've read the two of the books, I think. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I would they're some of my favorite books.
Yeah. I haven't
But
I've read
this
Dark For I've read Three Body and Dark Forest. I haven't read the rest. I think when I read them,
yeah.
those were all there was.
Oh, that must have been a while then.
It was a few years ago at least. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the third one has been out for a few years.
It was years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a friend of
But
mine's a huge science fiction guy. I am too. I love science
yeah,
fiction.
yeah. But I just love the and the Netflix version kind of did glossed over this, but the part the turkey theory and the sharpshooter theory. Do you remember this?
I forget that.
It's very relevant to this conversation. So The turkey one is basically so imagine you have turkey scientists basically, and they're trying to figure out their world too, and they notice that every day the farmer shows up and gives them food, and it's like a reliable pattern of the universe. And Thanksgiving comes around and they're like, okay, time for feeding time, and then they all get slaughtered because that's the day that the farmer decided that the pattern is
Has
changed.
changed.
Yep. And the sharpshooter one is I think it's like flatlanders, people living on a 2D plane or something, and
Hmm.
every 2 miles or whatever, they notice there's a hole punched in their dimension, and they don't know where it goes to, but it's the same size hole, it's the same distance between every time in a straight line, and it's like this unbreakable law. No matter how far they go, there's a hole, the same distance, same direction. And but it turns out it was just the whim of someone living in the third dimension just decided to shoot in this regular pattern across whatever target, and it was just the whim of some, I guess, higher being just deciding to do that for no reason. And but the flatlanders think it's like this immutable law of their
Hmm.
universe, and it's meant to scare you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. The consistent laws that we, you know, that we take, as axiomatic, the laws of
mm,
physics being consistent, the the naturalistic explanations being, the way things work. Those are, they say, they're assumptions, man. We think they're true. They probably are. They always have been.
mhm.
I don't know.
And it could change at any time. But I think yeah, I think observing what works for our reality, I think is good enough, and precepts take advantage of the fact that there is that doubt,
Yeah, I think
and they
that's
they
that's
twist it.
that's true, and they also take advantage of the fact that people don't, have a really strong grasp on the philosophy of science, right?
Mhm.
And this whole notion that, and a lot of people get caught in this, and they think, well, I'm an empiricist and I know what I know,
Yeah.
and they don't realize you know a lot, but the philosophy of science is a thing, man. There are assumptions.
And their case is actually, like, very obviously weak, but
Yeah, well,
I
what
think
they
the
like to do
tactic.
when you call out their assumptions is that they like to say,
Yeah,
um, I'm allowed to know that my assumptions are true, and I'm allowed to make these assumptions, but you're not. And so
yeah,
you are stuck in solipsism, and your world doesn't make sense, but mine does because I have a revelation from God and you don't. My revelation from God allows me to justify my assumptions, but your lack of a belief in God means that you can't justify your assumptions, right?
and
Which is kind of
I found that it's almost precept is almost not even about that worldview, it's about the tactic of not talking about that crux of their worldview, and always staying on offense, and
yeah,
never allowing themselves to be put on the defense for that. How
yeah.
do you know the
I
revelation is
I
true?
don't know how you got your hands on Darth Dawkins. I'd love to get my hands on that guy.
I it was just luck. I mentioned
Yeah, I don't think he does modern day debates anymore at all. I
it
don't think
might
he
have been my
can
fault.
these. What's that?
It might have been my
Might have
fault.
been. You did well
Um,
against that guy. Yeah,
he
might
quit.
have been.
And so James, the I had mentioned previously to him that I wanted to debate Darth Dawkins, and one day he just said that I got him for you, and I was like, yes, absolutely,
There you go.
I'm in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd love to get my hand. Hey, if there are any pre-suppers in the chat and they want to have a go, like let me know. We'll do her up. But yeah,
Yeah, I think so. I think he's still over on an app called Clubhouse.
yeah, I have Clubhouse because I debated. I don't know if you know this guy, Sam Redefined Living. He's a
Kind of my
jerk.
personal nemesis.
Is that right? There'll
I
be at
consider it.
some point.
I
I'm
mean,
still trying to figure out just how to do it, but I have a really good debate against him about precept stuff. So at
yeah,
some point, people will
he
see that.
won't.
By the
He
way,
won't talk to
everybody
me.
in the chat, and everybody who sees this in the future, so my bargain that I'm going to make with you, this is a unilateral contract, which means that it is open for acceptance, without notice by simply performing um, uh, the requirements of the contract. My offer to you is that you can have the second Hoven debate. I will post it on my channel, and I will work on the commentary once I get 1,000 subscribers, so that I can do it once it's monetized. So if you're not subscribed yet and you are itching to see that debate, then you can go and find it elsewhere. But then that would be bad. I don't want you to do that. So just subscribe so we can get to 1,000. I need like 120 more of you guys, and then you can have the debate. So sign up. That's the deal.
Yeah, and I'll post this to mine, and I'll send them your way as well.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, this has been a very pleasant conversation. I've quite enjoyed it. I appreciate you kind of jumping on here, and
likewise. And I like getting grilled as well.
I didn't really get to grill you that much because you were very conciliatory and reasonable. The grilling really kind of works when somebody um, takes a position that we both know isn't really true, and they're trying to kind of wiggle around
Mhm,
and sort of dodge, like instead of the real fear here is that pre-suppers are going to watch my content, and then they're going to like learn how to cross-examine properly, and then they'll get to the point where instead of just saying stop dodging and start yelling at people, that they'll actually learn how to force the admission even when the person is dodging,
mhm,
right? Because that's kind of like what my skill set is designed to do, right?
mhm.
Yeah. But
Well, I don't know where you are on moral realism, but I'm a moral realist, and I'd be glad to have you grill me on that one
I'm not
time.
sure what that is.
Basically, just um, the stance that there are moral facts or that there is truth value to moral statements.
Or you're saying like objective moral truths. You're saying
Mm,
that there's such a thing as an objective morality. There's an
mhm,
objective right and wrong.
yeah.
I think there's some truth to that. I don't know. I could prepare a line on
Mm,
uh compare I could prepare a line on for you, and run you through it if that's something you're interested in. You could think about that.
yeah.
Yeah. Think about, I don't know, pick your most controversial position that you think's the hardest to defend, and then I can attack it.
Well, that's definitely as far as within the atheist or skeptic community, that's kind of what my crusade right now is. Um, going off to after the moral relativism within
Within
um
Christianity, or within, like, 'cause I mean, moral
within
relativism is really
within
more
like
common
what I
to.
yeah what I consider my side. I would attack the moral relativists on my end of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, because typically the fundies are the ones that say there's an objective moral truth, right?
Yeah, and that they're all mostly divine command theory, which I oppose. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have a problem with the idea that um, I don't think that God's what the Bible says God is um, going to do in terms of judgment doesn't sound fair to me. I
Mhm.
don't think that what God says he's going to do and the way that he says that he's going to assign people to heaven and hell sounds fair. And
It
I mean, I've
it doesn't
acted for
even
far too many sexual assault victims to be okay with the notion that, like, you know, perpetrators are going to go to heaven and their victims are going to go to hell based on the fact that the perpetrator happened to believe in Jesus and that the victim didn't, like,
yeah, it doesn't even seem rational or practical or reasonable in any way. It just
well, it doesn't
it's not
seem,
even
it
a
doesn't,
moral
it doesn't seem
system.
like, I mean, torturing a 7-year-old girl who was sexually abused and didn't happen to believe in God and died as a result,
Mhm.
and saying that that person goes to hell for all eternity, and
Yeah.
that the priest that was her abuser goes to heaven doesn't sit well with me, right?
Yeah,
You know what,
I
if that's the way that, I would rather be like, I stand with the victim. I will go to hell. I would rather go to hell and be with the people, like, and be with the victims,
mhm.
than go to heaven and be with the perpetrators.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I feel
I
that
would
strongly. If that's what you think is fair, I think you're not fair.
yeah. I would hope that I would, make the same choice. Um, and I would say it's not even a moral system because it doesn't matter how you act. It just matters whether you're in the club or not.
That's the problem.
Mhm.
And it's that whole thing about, is good good because it's good, or is it good because God chooses it? I
Mhm.
think good is good because it's good.
Yeah, and assuming best case for the theist, like that's just because God is good and intelligent, so he chooses the good, not that he dictates the good, right? So he's intelligent enough to pick to understand the good, basically.
No, hang on just a second. Mark Stoney in the chat has said that I've just made a terrible straw man. Um, I don't know that I have, and also said that I gave a smug grin. I actually feel very strongly about that particular thing that I said, and I'm not being smug. I'm being quite sincere. But Mark, uh, if you think that I've made a straw man out of the argument, um, please tell me, because I don't mean to be a straw. I don't mean to create a straw man. That's actually something that I really struggle with, is this notion that I struggle with the idea that I don't think that God is being fair in his judgment, because justice is really important to me, and that's one of the things that really rattles my faith and makes me an agnostic, or a, not, like, I struggle with the idea that, because, Mark, like, I literally have acted for people in that very situation. Like, it's not a hypothetical to me. I know these people. I know their families, people who have died, who were just by stroke of luck not Christians, who died at the hands of abusive Christians, like priests we're talking. The notion that, you know, the notion that God is not going to be fair, that he's going to torture the little girl, and that he will just forgive her abuser, isn't something I take lightly. I don't like that. I really don't like that. So I'm not trying to be insincere. I'm not trying to be smug. I take that very seriously.
And I think it's a lot less of a problem if there's some people out there who say, "Oh, well, you can like accept God or the truth after you're dead." And it's like, okay, whatever that means, I guess that's a little more fair. I don't understand why there's an arbitrary cutoff. Like you die, you can't ask for forgiveness or come to truth or whatever is important just because you're dead even though you're still conscious and still able to learn?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the notion that you can be punished infinitely for finite crimes is also a problem. But Mark has said he said he knows that abusers are everywhere, including the church, but he doesn't believe abusers are in heaven. I mean, you know, I don't know.
But
Like when I look at the Bible says that all sins are forgiven if you believe that Jesus
mhm,
dies for your sins. It doesn't say that he dies for the ones that we don't find morally objectionable. It says he dies for them all, and he says that if you are not a believer, it doesn't matter how minor your sins are. You know, you can look at a woman with lust in your heart, and you will go to hell forever. You could you know, Gandhi goes to hell and Hitler goes to heaven, right? That's the way this supposedly it works. I would rather hang out with Gandhi though.
yeah, Mark Stoney, he was the former Hovind
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
associate guy, yeah.
yeah, no, he was, but I don't think that doesn't make him a bad person. There's room in our
Yeah.
tent for everybody, right?
Yeah, and I don't know him personally, but yeah,
No, I mean I
that
don't either, but I
it's
mean,
definitely a bad belief, I would say. Or I don't know what he actually believes. He seems to think that there is some sort of fairness, but that's doesn't seem to be what the Bible is saying.
yeah, I mean I don't know. Well, like I'm not going to put words in his mouth. I think he like we're talking about like our actual feelings right now. We're not. This isn't really a debate, right? Like this is just sort of
Mhm.
um uh we're all kind of struggling towards the truth, and like I don't know the answers to these questions, and I don't have the right answers, and I'm not trying to get anything out of anybody, right?
Yeah.
This is a very at this point in the conversation, this is a very open and accepting and you know vulnerable like aspect of we're talking about morality, we're talking about what we think is fair, we're talking about what we believe, right? Like I think Marx's thoughts about his God and his idea of fairness. um I don't know, I don't have to agree with them, but I'll respect them,
And
right?
I think a loving, all-knowing God would understand that it's a struggle to to understand this stuff and
Yeah, well I
would
mean that's kind of
sympathize with
I mean
that.
that's sort of the thing that I think a lot of presuppers don't or a lot of them. You can't speak for everyone, but the classic sort of position is that they don't respect that, and I mean you know that's I guess that's why we do battle with them.
Mhm.
But you know what? I think that's probably a good place to end the stream. And thanks for everybody who stuck around for almost 2 hours to hear me and Snake wax poetic about philosophy and science and all these things that we don't actually even understand ourselves. And Snake, thank you so much once again for coming on my channel. And um, I look forward to many future collaborations with you.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and that's why I drop these lines and comments is and to have these interesting conversations. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good. All right, guys, have a good night.
See y'all.